going to have a conversation. And we come from this long heritage of Moses and Paul and all these very inspiring people who, like you, have noticed that there's some problems in the world and that it could be better. So I'd like to just begin by asking you a question, because there's just such a lack of dialogue, information, cultural exchange with the United States and China. So the first question is, why has the United States become so hostile to China?
I think that the very simple answer to that is that China is the strongest, the most important threat to American domination of the world. And the United States after World War II adopted the view that it was the one hope for a healthy control of the whole planet. And American exceptionalism was the ground of this policy. But obviously, this is a policy that was not adopted by the world as a whole. The United Nations didn't declare it. And so there have always been parts of the world that did not want to allow the United States to control. And for a long time, the greatest opposition came from the Soviet Union. And even after the Soviet Union dismantled itself of its empire and ceased to be communist, you may remember that the depiction of Putin was almost always quite negative. And Russia was still viewed as a threat. But during the Obama administration, there was a tilt to Asia. The United States had recognized that China was the greatest threat to its supremacy and control of the planet. So it's not, I mean, what China did was become powerful and economically successful. And that was inherently a threat. Of course, if China had been subservient to the United States, I mean, in many countries, there have been people who were leaders who were felt by the United States as enemies because they were far more interested in the well-being of their own people than in contributing to this global peace under Washington. And the United States has often succeeded in regime change in one way or another. But it's very difficult for the United States to engage in regime change in China. It's too strong, too independent. And a strong, independent nation with ambitions to become even stronger and more independent is inherently a profound threat to the global ambitions that have been deeply set as the heart of American foreign policy. So it's not the only country. Russia is much less of a threat, but you see that we've once again stirring up intense feelings of animosity toward Russia because Russia is threatening to support the Russians in Ukraine against further incursions. But the answer is, of course, China has faults. I was mentioning one from our point of view. The lack of freedom of speech in China is a very serious fault. Well, I agree, but whether it's more serious than a lack of homes for places to live for many people. The point is, once we have decided a country is a threat to our domination, we will focus upon its weaknesses and give very little emphasis in our newspapers and propaganda to its successes. not all Americans know that China has raised more than 500 million people out of poverty. Poverty meaning here what we would call extreme poverty. It doesn't mean that all Chinese are rich by any means. So I think that the two policies are inherently in conflict with each other. China has no intention of being subservient to the United States. The United States is very much opposed to the kind of freedom that threatens its global domination. I think that may be enough on that.
Well, I'm just so
Question.
struck by the letter that you wrote that I think many people
Yes.
have read is a testament to it's the opposite of that kind of domination. It was
Exactly.
lifting up the very best of both these two leaders. So your impulse to model a peaceful way of working together, what is your fear if that doesn't happen? What are the worst things that could happen if the United States and China do not become friends?
Well, if both nations continue on their present course, China in the past decades has not put a great deal of emphasis on its military prowess. I mean, of course, it's had a good army and navy and so forth, but about 2 years ago, or maybe more recently, it decided that since the United States repeatedly called it an enemy and repeatedly provoked it in various ways, that it needed to prepare for nuclear war. And it ordered a great many very modern, ultra-modern bombs, which will be delivered in 2 or 3 years. And the United States does not really want an equal power in the world. And so there are people in Washington, people with power, who are seriously thinking that perhaps they need to provoke a war before these bombs have been delivered. And that would mean, if I may put it in a kind of cynical way, that the Chinese would only be able to kill every American once, while the Americans could kill every Chinese 10 times. That's obviously, I'm now being propagandistic. And I'll talk about propaganda more but I hope you understand. I don't mean that quite literally, but China already is able to make the United States pay very much and a costly way for one, but it will lose the nuclear war now. And after it gets this delivery, it won't. So my real anxiety is that the United States will decide now is the time to provoke China. And it can do so by recognizing Taiwan as an independent country and then guaranteeing Taiwan's integrity militarily. China is not planning to give up any part of its territory. So I think that the danger of an imminent, within the next 2 or 3 years, of a nuclear war it simply means both countries continue doing what they're doing now. That's all it will take to have a nuclear war. And I am frightened about that. The other side of it is that unless there is cooperation, strong cooperation between the United States and China in leading the world in the response to the environmental crises, right now it's primarily the climate crisis that has the attention of the world. We're going to destroy ourselves by not responding adequately. I mean, as long as the United States is more interested in being in control of what happens throughout the planet And China is absolutely committed to its territorial integrity. We cannot cooperate in a way that could save us from devastating consequences. So simply the failure of the lack of cooperation is enough to mean the planet has very little chance, civilization has very little chance of survival. But this point, I think, was recognized by Biden, because Biden did ask China to cooperate on these issues. It was at that point that we thought there was a chance. And it's amazing that the particular things that we asked for, that is, we asked in the letter, I say it to China, I quite understand that you cannot cooperate with a nation that repeatedly insists that you are its enemy. That just won't work. But please, if the United States will give any gesture, or Biden will give any gesture of improving relationships, set aside all of your other concerns about enmity, and cooperate on these issues. And I asked Biden to please stop calling China enemy. And Biden did announce that China should not be called the enemy. It was the competitor, and it is a competitor. There's no question about that. And she actually did go to Glasgow. And there is a committee, a US-China committee, that is working on issues, global issues related to the climate process. So if they would really come out with significant proposals that both the Chinese and the US government would back, and if they were the kind of proposals that really, awaken people to possibilities that have not been discussed in the wider public. I don't mean they haven't been discussed at all. There are good ideas about how to deal with the climate crisis. I think that might have an effect on that might give a higher priority to saving the world than to US domination on the one hand and Chinese commitment to its territorial integrity on the other. So that's why I do have some hope, but the danger is not set aside by the fact that a little committee is at work that might come out with good proposals, and that maybe the two governments would support them. But one has to look for.
Oh.
Excuse us.
For next week.
Thank you. How wonderful, John, that we are expected to eat next week. It's so depressing what we're talking about, but there are people who are actually planning food for us, so that's good.
I live in Pilgrim Place, and I live in the intermediate care facility, and we eat 2 meals a day. They supply two meals a day for us, and we are wonderfully taken care of. When I talk about all of the horrible things the terrible dangers in the world, it's my day-to-day life is one of being taken care of and luxury. So the contrast is almost embarrassing.
Well, what you're describing between China and the United States, it's like watching, a great tragedy like King Lear or something on stage, and you go, no, it doesn't have to be that everybody's going to die. And so what is your hope? I I keep thinking, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could all elect you as ambassador to China and we could start having events and maybe we can do that. But what is your hope that we can, what can we do?
Well, one of the many problems is that we are so controlled that we supposedly have free press and free speech and so forth, but honestly, we don't. If we really had a free press that was interested in informing us, we would be kept informed of what was really going on in China. And of course, if you could say the same thing the other way. I'm not trying to depict China as completely innocent. I think it's it's not what you usually call a dictatorship. It's ruled by a communist party. The party has 30 million members. I mean, the notion of Xi is not a dictator in that sense. But nothing will happen in China that the Communist Party opposes. There are other parties. But so I'm just saying, in the case of China, the important person to influence is President Xi. And that can be done by influencing people in the party. But there's nothing about Xi's primary goals that threatens the United States as such. If we were just interested in what we would normally call our national interest, we could cooperate easily with China. But in the United States, although we really are a democracy, we really do vote on important matters. I mean, we vote on who is going to vote on important matters. Sometimes it's called the deep state. I am not but basically a group of corporate leaders determine what the limits are of what will be talked about. And one of the things that has been off limits is serious discussion of our relationship to China. You can tell me the last time you read, you saw in the New York Times or anywhere else, an attempt to really understand how the Chinese see the world and a discussion of how we might relate to China. And therefore, the vast majority of Americans have a very negative attitude toward China now. They have been exposed to nothing but negative propaganda. They think that the Uyghurs are being persecuted because they're Muslims. And that is just simply not true. I mean, there are real problems about the Uyghurs. We could talk about that. And I could go on and on. The picture, we need the American people to know what's really happening in China. That would be a great benefit. We need them to think about what it would be the best policy for the United States. We need them to know that the present policies are leading toward war, and war between two nuclear powers going to be very hard to keep that from becoming nuclear. It might. We might succeed in that. So I think that to get the American people exposed to the reality of the present situation and get them thinking about what kind of policy they would like to have. And I trust the American people not to want a nuclear war.
Right, they don't.
I don't think they do.
No.
And they don't really want the government to push in directions that make a nuclear war a threat. So I think getting accurate information, which is both positive and negative about China, to millions of Americans who take politics seriously and take international affairs seriously, so that in the process of a campaign for Congress, somebody would have to talk a little bit about what they think about foreign policy. Foreign policy is almost disappeared as a whole. It's not just about China that has disappeared. But all that we get is that these countries that are not subservient to the United States are bad. And they're all bad. I don't know a country that you can't find a lot to, but certainly you could look at the United States at the present time and talk a long time about how bad we are. We're not in position to be harsh judges of other countries. And to be harsh judges and then to punish them. Of course, there are many countries that are sanctioned by the United States at the present time, and in some of those countries, starvation is rampant. And that doesn't matter to us. You see, what matters is that they become subservient. It's not. American exceptionalism may have had some real meaning at one time. May have been we're not a threat to other countries, but rather an example and a leader. I'm not sure we could ever be we could brag about our past very much, but certainly I bragged about the United States treatment of Japan. I was in Japan in the Army of Occupation. And I think it was a model of treatment of an enemy. So it's not that we're incapable of doing very good things, but the people who are interested in that are not the people in charge. And the rich and the corporations have so much power, and they have a vision of a world that is really organized for the sake of corporate success. And that matters more to them. I don't think many of them really don't care about the United States, but the United States government is the major instrument for enforcing the corporate will on the world. I don't think the American people want that. I've been interested that despite the fact that we have two political parties on the subject that China is the one topic on which they are absolutely agreed. Any legislation that is negative to China sweeps through without discussion. Any amount of money is available for it. There's no difference between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. I think it should be possible to change that. And
How?
how? Well, that of course is the question that none of us know how. We have recently been talking with a woman who is in the professional business of
Publicity.
publicity and of getting people to read a particular book or something. There's not a book we want read because the book that is needed doesn't exist, as far as I know. But we are hoping maybe she can give us some help and guidance in how to get a discussion about China into the public. In the so-called free country with a free press and free thought, it should be possible to get a discussion going of issues that are so important for the future of all of us. We don't know.
Well, if anyone can lead the way, it's you, because you have gone to China. You know people in very high levels of government. You have been very successful in creating centers, universities there, having friendships. You've had a big impact on the environmental field and the field of philosophy. So if you have been able to go to China as an ambassador of the United States and do amazing work and have very deep, meaningful relationships, then we want to follow you. We want you to be our ambassador. And I know I speak for everybody. We need to walk into this limbo abyss that we don't know what it is, because it's too important. And even though we don't know exactly how to do it, I thank you for your letters to the presidents and your courage in saying we must begin. We don't know exactly how, but we must begin.
Well, I have been utterly astonished that as a Protestant theologian, I have had so much more influence in China than in the United States. In China, there's not the prejudice against Christian theology that there is in the United States.
I know.
In the universities. I mean, I don't push theology when I'm talking in China, but of course, they know that the ideas I'm pushing, I push out of a Christian background. There's no secret about that.
Sorry, that's China calling.
Yeah, but my career in the United States has been very much at the margin.
Mhm.
I'm at the margin of theology, at the margin of philosophy, margin of economics, the margin of the university, the margin of the church. I could go down the list. I'm very proud of that. I'm not, this is not a humble statement. It's just the fact. But I think the reason I think it's worth talking about this now is that there is a change in the climate
Yes.
in the United States.
Mhm.
We in the process community have promoted the idea of ecological civilization, which is something that China has committed itself to. The idea came originally from the United Nations. And there's been a very marginal interest in it. But things have changed. I will give you one statistic that is astonished me. 2 or 3 years ago, academia lets people in the academic world know when their names appear in print. And that may be a footnote, it may be just one mention in the, or it may be a long discussion. There's no discrimination of that kind. And after 50 or 60 years, I had around 500 mentions. I now have more than 4,000.
That's awesome.
But that shows a change
Yes,
in the
there is a
last
change.
2
Yes.
years.
Yes.
That lots of people are now thinking maybe philosophy, maybe theology, maybe universities, maybe the church should be really seriously concerned about what we are doing to the planet. And when they look for those who have made suggestions along these lines, we in the process community stand out. And so we have opportunities we've never had before. And because I am trusted by the leaders of China, and we have opportunities, openness in the United States that we've never had before. I feel I have to try to be more than marginal. Yeah.
Well, you have infused me with hope. Even though I see there's not a clear direction and road, but we are open to a new way of walking forth.
Well, there is a small group of us, but we are not organized. We have no legal status whatsoever, but we get together and talk about it, and recently decided it would be good if we could get someone who had professional knowledge of how to get onto the radio, into the television, into newspapers and so forth. Maybe if they give us leadership, we can find some way to follow. And if any of you have good ideas about it, please help us.
Yes. All good ideas are needed. Yeah.
Yes.
One of the greatest ideas we talked about last time was the idea of meeting in Hawaii as a
Mhm.
geographic place, like the photograph of President Xi and President Biden toasting, that this visualization and this making manifest these two countries physically coming together
Yeah.
is, I think, very powerful. And you are the person to show us the way.
Well, in that particular case, I think that
Audrey Kitagawa.
Audrey Kitagawa
Yes. Yes.
will be the leader.
Yes.
I'd be glad to cooperate
Mhm.
in any way. So I think I sometimes don't know whether to call myself a Christian or not, because so many people define Christianity in ways that leave me out. But I am a disciple of Jesus. And perhaps Jesus' most important and really, it's such a rare teaching that I'm inclined to say without him, it would not be functioning in the world at all today. But that is the teaching that we should love our enemies. And if we could get American Christians to love the Chinese, that would be a wonderful step. But unfortunately, most American Christians don't pay much attention to Jesus. It's a sad fact. So many tasks before us. You see, it was a Hindu who really picked up on Jesus' teaching, and it may be atheists who pick up. I think there are advantages in being a theist, but I'm just saying, whoever really takes seriously the idea of loving enemies is a disciple of Jesus. Don't have to be a Christian, obviously, since Gandhi never became a Christian for good reasons. Both he and Martin Luther King showed that this is not an irrelevant. I mean, you can really change the world by loving enemies. So I'll close on that note.
Yes.
This is a service of worship. I think it's all right to quote Jesus in the service of worship, don't you?
Yeah, amen. And our closing thought then is to love our enemies. And in the spirit of Martin Luther King, we are going to be celebrating him this month, and Gandhi, and all of these leaders who have worked tirelessly to bring about seemingly impossible kinds of changes. And it's happened in history many times. So we pray that it will happen with this new relationship that we need in loving our enemies of China. So thank you, Dr. Cobb, very much.